Rain fell over Whitestone Abbey like an omen. The bells rang for a wedding, but no joy echoed through the grand hall, only whispers, trembling candles, and the hollow sound of duty binding two strangers. Lady Isabella Harrow stood before the altar, her face pale beneath a lace veil. Her heart beat not with love, but with resentment. Her hands cold, delicate, were clasped in those of Lord Damien Ravenscroft, the Duke of Blackmere, a man she had sworn never to forgive. He looked at her with quiet arrogance, his expression unreadable, tall, dark-haired, every inch the powerful noble who got what he wanted. And today, what he wanted was her. "Do you, Lady Isabella Harrow, take this man?" The priest's words blurred. She heard only the storm outside, the memory of her father's dying plea. "You must marry him, Isabella. He owns everything now." So she did. She spoke the words, her voice barely audible. "I do." When it was over, and the applause of polite society echoed like cruel laughter, Damien leaned close to her ear. His breath brushed her skin. "You may hate me, my lady," he murmured, "but you'll wear my name with pride before this year ends." She flinched, her jaw tightening. "You'll die waiting for that." The carriage ride to Blackmere Manor was silent. The landscape rolled by, endless moors, storm clouds, a world of gray. Isabella sat rigid, staring out the window, refusing to look at her new husband. Damien broke the silence first. "You think I married you for pleasure?" he said, tone sharp. "You flatter yourself, my lady. I married you for justice." She turned slowly. "Justice. You call this justice? Forcing me into a life I never wanted?" He met her gaze, steel meeting fire. "Your family ruined mine. You think I forgot that?" Her throat tightened. "That was my father's doing, not mine." "Then you'll atone for it," he said coldly. "As my wife." The carriage jolted to a stop before the looming gates of Blackmere Manor, an ancient stone fortress swallowed by ivy and shadow. The servants bowed as they entered, though their eyes avoided hers. Inside, the hall smelled of old wood and rain. Portraits of Ravenscrofts long dead lined the walls, every gaze harsh, watchful. Damien stopped at the stairs and looked back at her. "You'll have your own chamber," he said, his voice curt. "We needn't see much of each other, but you'll attend dinner every night. And remember, this is not your home, it's your penance." She raised her chin. "Then you'll find me a most disobedient prisoner, my lord." His eyes darkened, not with anger, but something far more dangerous. "We'll see about that." That night, alone in her candlelit chamber, Isabella pressed her hands against the windowpane. The storm still raged outside, lightning flashing over the moors. Somewhere deep within the manor, she heard the echo of a piano, a melody soft, haunting. Damien was playing. She had never known a man like him could play with such sorrow. And though she wanted to hate him, truly hate him, something in that melody made her heart ache. For the first time, Lady Isabella wondered if the man she despised might be the one who would one day destroy her heart completely. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It beat against the windows of Blackmere Manor like a curse that refused to lift. Lady Isabella Harrow now, unwillingly, the Duchess of Blackmere, wandered through its vast, echoing corridors, a ghost in her own life. Every corner whispered of him. Every portrait, every book, every servant's glance reminded her. She belonged here only because he willed it. That evening, the dinner table stretched long and cold. 1,000 candles burned, but warmth never touched her. Damien sat across from her, his posture perfect, his silence louder than any insult. They ate in silence until she finally broke it. "Do you always eat in graves, my lord?" she asked quietly, eyes glinting. One of the servants froze, unsure if they'd heard her correctly. Damien's knife paused mid-cut. Then, slowly, his lips curved. "Only when the ghost sitting opposite refuses to live." Her eyes flashed. "If you married me only to torment me, you're succeeding." He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine lazily. "You mistake honesty for cruelty. You despise me for what your father did, yet I am the one left to pay the price of his betrayal." She met his gaze steadily. "And what price is that?" His eyes softened for the briefest moment. "Loneliness." The single word hung between them, fragile as glass. Later that night, unable to sleep, Isabella walked the upper gallery, where moonlight spilled through tall windows. Hello, in the great hall. She heard it again, the piano. The same haunting melody she had heard on their wedding night. Curiosity, or perhaps something far more dangerous, pulled her toward it. She descended the stairs quietly, barefoot, the hem of her silk gown brushing the floor. Damien sat at the piano, candlelight dancing across his face. His expression was unguarded, lost in memory. It was not the face of a man she hated. It was the face of a man who had been broken long before she came into his life. When he finally noticed her, the music stopped. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said softly. "You didn't," he murmured. "This house listens better than people do." She stepped closer, hesitant. "That song, you play it every night." His jaw tightened. "It was my mother's favorite. Before your father destroyed her estate and left her to die in debt." Her breath caught. "I didn't know." "No," he said bitterly. "You didn't have to. You were born into silk while we starved in silence." She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but guilt silenced her. Instead, she whispered, "Then why marry me at all?" His eyes rose to hers, dark and burning. "Because," he said slowly, "the only way to destroy the Harrow name was to wear it next to mine." Thunder crashed overhead, lightning flashed through the windows, and for a moment, they stood inches apart, two souls bound by ruin. The silence was unbearable. Then he reached for her hand, not in anger, not in dominance, but in something almost human. Her breath hitched as his fingers brushed hers. "Isabella," he whispered, "you think I wanted this war between us? I wanted peace, but all I found was you." And before reason could stop her, she whispered back, "Then perhaps peace was never what we were meant for." He kissed her. It wasn't gentle, it was a storm. A kiss made of rage, grief, and the desperate ache of two hearts too proud to admit they were already burning for each other. When they finally broke apart, she trembled not from fear, but from the truth of it. Her voice was barely a breath. "I hate you for making me feel this way." His lips brushed her ear. "Then hate me forever, my love. I'll take every moment of it." Outside, thunder roared again, and inside, something far more dangerous than hatred was born. As the months rolled into a soft English spring, Thornbeck Forest seemed gentler, as if the earth itself exhaled peace after years of turmoil. But beneath its serene green canopy, a storm still brewed, not of weather, but of hearts. Odette stood by the balcony of her chamber, the morning mist curling through her hair. She had begun teaching the orphans of the village to read, a small act of rebellion against the rigid norms that once silenced her spirit. Every sunrise brought her a strange ache, not sorrow, not joy, but something dangerously in between. Each letter the children traced reminded her of Jorgen, his patience, his quiet strength, his smile that had once promised forever. But forever, it seemed, was a word the world rarely honored. For across the meadows in the Lord's manor, Jorgen had become something more, a man of power, respected by nobles, feared by rivals. Yet every accolade felt hollow. His heart, though guarded, remained haunted by one face, the huntress who'd tamed the wild in him, only to vanish when duty called louder than love. One evening, as twilight turned the sky to silver ash, Jorgen rode through Thornbeck once more. The sound of his horse's hooves echoed like memories, sharp, rhythmic, impossible to silence. And there she was. By the old willow tree near the forest's edge, Odette stood, a bow in her hand. Her hair, wind-tossed and untamed, glowed in the fading light. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. Every leaf, every bird, every beam of dying sun. Jorgen dismounted slowly. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said, voice low but trembling. Odette smiled faintly. "And yet, I've always been alone, haven't I?" The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of all they'd left unsaid. He took a hesitant step closer. "I never meant for us to end that way." She looked away, blinking fast. "You chose your duty. I chose freedom. Perhaps we were never meant to walk the same path. But our paths keep crossing," he murmured. Odette's breath caught. For the first time she saw in his eyes not the soldier, not the noble, but the man she'd once healed with love. The wind whispered between them, carrying the scent of earth and memory. She stepped forward, just enough that his gloved hand brushed against hers. It was a touch fragile as dawn, powerful as thunder. Then maybe, she whispered, our paths weren't meant to end. Just to rest a while. As dusk deepened into night, their silhouettes stood entwined beneath the willow, like two souls who had wandered far only to find home once more, not in a place, but in each other. And somewhere, deep within the quiet forest, the first firefly of the season rose into the dark small, bright, eternal. Rain fell softly over Thornbeck that night, a gentle silver drizzle that blurred the lines between dream and reality. Odette and Jorgen stood beneath the old willow tree, its leaves trembling under the weight of the storm. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was alive like a promise made between souls who had already lost too much to lie again. But fate, as always, was not yet done testing them. The next morning, word spread through the village. A royal decree had arrived. The crown demanded that every man of noble standing aid in suppressing a rebellion rising near the border. Jorgen was to lead the charge. Refusal meant treason. Odette heard the news before Jorgen could find her. Her hands froze around the book she was holding, its pages fluttering in the wind like the wings of a trapped bird. She knew this was the final turn, the moment that would decide not only their love but the lives they would lead thereafter. When he came to her that evening, his uniform already packed, his sword glinting in the fading sun, she did not weep. She only looked at him steady, strong, and heartbreakingly calm. "You're leaving again," she said softly. "I must," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "It's my duty." "And what of your heart?" she whispered. He hesitated, that one small pause that revealed everything. Then he stepped closer, cupping her face in his roughened hands. "My heart," he said quietly, "has never left you." The words cracked something open inside her. She wanted to beg him to stay, to run into the forest and never return. But love, real love, wasn't about possession. It was about faith. So instead, she pressed a small silver pendant into his hand, the one she had worn since her father's death. "For luck," she said, "and for truth. If you ever forget who you are, touch it. It will remind you." Jorgen nodded, his jaw tight. Then, without another word, he leaned forward and kissed her. Not with the hunger of passion, but with the quiet certainty of destiny. It was the kind of kiss that said, "Even if the world ends, I will find you again." Weeks turned to months. The rebellion raged and then faded into history. The villagers whispered prayers for their lost sons, their fallen fathers. And Odette waited, each sunrise a test of hope. Then, one gray dawn, she heard the distant echo of hooves. She ran to the forest's edge, her heart hammering like a drum. Through the mist, a lone rider emerged, weary, scarred, but alive. Jorgen. He dismounted, the silver pendant still hanging around his neck. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, eyes filled with all the words they had never said. Then, slowly, Odette smiled through her tears. "You found your way back." He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek. "You were the only direction I ever knew." And there, beneath the same willow where their story had begun, they embraced two souls who had walked through war, silence, and fate itself to find peace in each other's arms. As the rain began again, soft and sweet, Thornbeck Forest seemed to sigh with them, for love at last had come home. Cloud-dizzy years passed. Thornbeck changed, but quietly, the way seasons shift when no one is watching. The marketplace grew livelier, children's laughter filled the streets again, and every evening, the church bells rang a song that spoke of peace. At the edge of the village, beyond the cobblestone bridge, stood a little cottage wrapped in ivy and roses. Smoke curled from its chimney each dawn, and the smell of baked bread and wildflowers drifted into the forest. Inside lived Jorgen and Odette, the names that once echoed through whispers of scandal and sorrow, now spoken with reverence and quiet envy. Jorgen's hair had grown longer, streaked faintly with silver. The scars from battle remained faint lines tracing the story of every wound he'd survived. Yet when Odette brushed her fingers against them, they no longer felt like marks of pain, but proof of endurance. Odette, too, had changed. She was no longer the fragile dreamer who once hid beneath a hunter's hood. There was strength in her eyes now. Calm, steady, and deep. The kind of strength that only comes from losing everything once and daring to love again anyway. Their love had become something sacred, quieter than passion, stronger than fear. Mornings began with shared silence and soft smiles. Evenings ended with reading old poetry by firelight, the world outside forgotten. But peace, as it always does, carried a whisper of uncertainty. One afternoon, as Odette was tending the garden, a messenger arrived from the city. A letter sealed in crimson wax, bearing the Duke's emblem. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. The letter was brief. The king's health declines. The court seeks Georgian's counsel once more. The crown remembers loyalty, and so does destiny. She read the words twice, her breath catching in her chest. The thought of returning to the city, to the cold marble halls where lies ruled and hearts froze, filled her with dread. When Jorgen returned from the forest that evening, his boots covered in dirt and his expression tired but gentle, she handed him the letter silently. He read it slowly, then looked up. "Odette," he began, but she shook her head, her voice trembling. "You've given enough, Jorgen, to them, to war, to duty. Don't go back to where they tried to take your soul." He smiled faintly. "And if duty calls again," she took his hand, pressing it against her heart, "then remember where your home truly is." The firelight flickered between them, painting their faces in gold and shadow. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, soft, like an echo from another lifetime. That night, Jorgen stood by the window long after Odette had fallen asleep, the letter still in his hand. He watched the forest sway in the moonlight, remembering everything. The lies, the rebellion, the near deaths, and the single truth that had never changed. Her. By dawn, the letter lay in ashes on the hearth. He chose her. He always would. As sunlight broke through the clouds, Odette woke to find him beside her, his arm around her waist, his breath warm against her neck. Outside, the birds sang, not of endings, but of quiet, everlasting beginnings. For the first time in years, Odette smiled without fear. Love hadn't just survived the storm. It had become the calm after it. Ranger in the years that followed, time carried its gentle hand over Thornbeck, softening every scar and shadow the village once bore. The wars had ended, the dukes and lords who once ruled with iron hands were gone, and peace long and hard-earned found its way into every cobblestone and every soul. But even in that quiet age, one story refused to fade. They called it the tale of the hunter and his bride. Children whispered it by candlelight, old women told it while knitting by the fire. Every villager knew the names Jorgen and Odette, though few had truly seen them. They lived in that ivy-covered cottage by the lake, where the mist always hung low and the air smelled faintly of lilac and memory. Some said the Duke and his wife never aged, that their love had defied the years. Others claimed they died long ago, but their spirits still wandered the forest, watching over lost travelers who dared to walk its paths after dark. Every version of the tale began the same way. Once, there was a woman who taught a man what it meant to love more than he feared. And so the legend lived on. But within that cottage, real and quiet and warm life went on with ordinary grace. Jorgen and Odette spent their mornings tending roses and reading letters from friends who had once been enemies. Sometimes they hosted children from the village, telling them stories about courage and kindness. Without ever admitting those tales were their own, Odette had started painting again. Her canvases were filled with soft golds and stormy blues, skies that mirrored her heart's long journey from despair to peace. And Jorgen, who once commanded armies, now found his greatest joy in carving small wooden figures, birds, foxes, tiny stags, gifts he'd leave on doorsteps around the village without a word. They never sought recognition. They never returned to the grand halls or the empty titles that once defined their names. One autumn evening, when the leaves had turned amber and the air smelled of smoke and earth, Jorgen sat by the fire, holding Odette's hand. Her head rested on his shoulder, her eyes half closed as he read from a worn book of poetry. The flames flickered softly, and a chill wind whispered against the windows. She smiled faintly. "Jorgen, do you ever wonder what they'll remember of us?" He paused, closing the book. "Only that we loved fiercely, and without regret." Odette's eyes glistened. "That's enough for me." Outside, thunder murmured on the horizon. Not the sound of war, but of rain promising life. That night, the first snow fell over Thornbeck, covering the roofs, the trees, and the lake in silver silence. In the morning, when villagers passed by the ivy cottage, they noticed smoke still rising from the chimney, and 2 sets of footprints leading down to the water. But the door was closed, and it never opened again. Weeks later, a young girl wandered near the lake, and swore she saw them walking hand in hand through the mist, their faces serene, their laughter like wind in the trees. And from that day forward, lovers would visit the lake on winter evenings, leaving white roses at its edge, whispering wishes into the fog. They said if you listened closely, you could still hear her voice in the wind a love endures, even when all else fades. And his, low and steady, like the echo of an eternal promise. Always. Dizzy, it had been more than 2 centuries since anyone last spoke the true names of the Thornbeck lovers aloud. The world had changed, horses replaced by engines, candles by electricity, and letters by screens glowing in the dark. But the old manor still stood, half buried under ivy and time. Its windows were hollow, its floors covered in dust, except for one locked room. That was where Eleanor Whitby, a young historian from London, found herself one gray December morning. She had come to Thornbeck to document forgotten noble estates for her research on love letters of the Regency era. The caretaker had handed her the key with a shrug. "No one's opened that door in over 100 years, he'd said. "They say it belonged to the Duke and his bride. Leave before dark, miss. The forest doesn't take kindly to strangers." She had smiled politely, not believing a word. Inside, the air was still. Dust motes drifted in pale sunlight, falling on a cracked vanity, a tattered gown draped over a chair, and on the mantel, a wooden box sealed with wax. Her gloved fingers brushed against the seal. It broke like a sigh. Inside, she found a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Each one was written in looping, elegant script. The first line read, "My dearest heart, if these words reach another's eyes, then we have truly become ghosts of our own making." Eleanor's breath caught. The name beneath it, Odette Whitmore. Her surname. She read on, letter after letter, each one painting a portrait of forbidden love, exile, forgiveness, and the quiet years that followed. Odette's words were gentle but raw, filled with emotion that time could not dull. They called him a beast, yet he held me as though I were made of glass. When the world forgot us, we remembered each other. Love is not born in grandeur, but in the silence after ruin. As the light dimmed, Eleanor realized the final letter was unfinished. The ink trailed off mid-sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted or taken. Her hands trembled as she turned the page over. On the back, a single line had been hastily scrawled. "If you find this, remember us kindly. Love is never lost, only waiting to be found again." Just then, the wind howled through the cracked windows, and a faint scent of lilacs filled the air. The very fragrance Odette was said to love. Eleanor froze. The candles flickered, and from the far corner of the room, she heard a whisper low, like a man's voice carried on the wind. "You've found her." The flame went out. Heart pounding, Eleanor stumbled back, clutching the letters. When she turned, she caught a glimpse, only for a heartbeat, of 2 figures in the reflection of the dusty mirror. A woman in a pale gown, her hand entwined with a tall man in a dark coat. They were watching her. And then they were gone. By morning, she had left Thornbeck, but the letters, now safely kept in the British Museum, became the centerpiece of her book, The Lovers of Thornbeck, a true account. It became an instant bestseller. Scholars debated the story's authenticity, skeptics dismissed it as myth, and romantics flocked to the lake, laying roses at its edge. But Eleanor never returned. Not because she was afraid, but because sometimes she would wake at night to the faint scent of lilac, and a whisper at her ear, "You've done well, child." And though she lived in a world of light, part of her forever belonged to the ghosts of Thornbeck, where love, eternal and unbroken, still walked the misted shores of memory. Crescent moon, 2 years had passed since Eleanor Whitby first discovered the Thornbeck letters, the forgotten story of the Duke and his beloved bride. Her book had sold in every corner of England and beyond. Professors lectured about it, readers wept over it, and the world fell in love with their tragedy. Yet for Eleanor, something still felt incomplete. A quiet ache followed her, the feeling that Odette Whitmore's story was not finished. One evening, as rain drummed softly against her London window, a package arrived at her doorstep. No name, no return address, just an old wax seal, the same crest she had seen on the Duke's letters, a stag beneath a crown. Inside lay a single envelope yellowed with age. It read, "For Eleanor Whitby, when the time is right." Her heart raced as she broke the seal. The handwriting was Odette's. Asterisk, "My dearest one, if your eyes rest upon these words, it means you carry our name, our legacy, and our love. The world may believe we perished in peace, but our story did not end by the lake. I was with child. Asterisk Eleanor's breath caught. She gripped the letter tighter, scanning the fading ink. Asterisk the Duke never knew. When he left to meet the king, the fever took me early. The babe, our son, was sent away, hidden for his safety, for enemies still hunted his father's name. To protect him, I gave him to a family by the sea, the Whitbys. Perhaps that name is yours now. If you read this, know that love endures in blood as it does in spirit. The Duke's heart beat still. Through you. Asterisk the words blurred as Eleanor's tears fell upon the page. She rose from her desk, staring at the mirror across the room. For the first time she noticed how her own reflection, dark curls, gray eyes, the faint scar on her hand, matched the portrait of Odette that hung in the museum. Her throat tightened. It can't be. A gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing her candle. The scent of lilacs filled the air once more. And in that moment, she saw them faint, shimmering figures standing behind her reflection. Odette's soft smile, the Duke's steady gaze. They looked proud, peaceful. Eleanor whispered through her tears, "I found you. I found us." The figures began to fade, their light dissolving into the dusk. But as they vanished, a voice warm and deep echoed softly through the air. "Then our love has done what time could not." The next morning, Eleanor packed her bag and took the first train north to Thornbeck. When she reached the lake, it was dawn. Mist coiled over the water like silk. She walked barefoot to the edge, the final letter in her hands. "Kneeling," she whispered, "your story is safe now." She placed the letter on the water's surface. It floated gently, the ink glowing faintly under the pale morning light. Then, as if the lake itself had accepted her offering, the letter sank without a ripple. For a moment, all was still until the sound of two doves rose from the trees, circling above her before disappearing into the clouds. Eleanor smiled through her tears. The legend of the Thornbeck lovers had not ended in tragedy after all. It had simply waited, quietly, for love to find its way home again. And beneath the surface of the lake, where sunlight kissed the depths, two shapes seemed to shimmer, hands intertwined for eternity. Ring love does not die. It waits patient as time, gentle as memory.